Have you ever had a day where somebody just did something, in the morning preferably, that just ticked you off? Or maybe it was just as simple as a cold cup of coffee. You ever had a day where something bad was done by somebody else and you just couldn't get past it? It is amazing how far an unkindness will go in our day or in our life. Someone does something to us and we are not able to let go of it. Sometimes even if we forgive the person, we still can't let go of it. And it harms a relationship. You ever had that? I think we all have. On the other side of it, what about when something good happens? Every single day when my son goes off to go to school, usually I've got so many things going on in the morning, I would say half the time I don't get to say goodbye to him and wish him a good day because he runs out the door and I'm doing something in the basement or I'm taking care of the dogs because it's first thing in the morning for everybody. And I miss him. And I hope that I'm affecting his day because every single time I miss him, I quick get on my phone and I find the cutest little school animated GIF that I can find to send him this little, look here, like school bus flying through the air or some, I think there's one of Charlie Brown falling asleep at his desk. I send him something like that, sort of just to think to myself, can I set the tone for this day? And I think what happens very often is we get the tone set for our life story in either a good or bad way, and it affects us a lot. It's a little bit of what happens in Ruth, is whether there's kindness or unkindness or fortune or misfortune, sets the tone. But there's something that happens in this story that is so crucial to the rest of Scripture, I want you to not miss it. A little bit about the book of Ruth. If you go through the Bible, as I mentioned, you got Genesis. Genesis is those early stories. I love reading the book of Genesis. I think it's a fun book because there's so many great stories, so many great biblical characters. Then we get into Exodus. That's just as much fun because we're reading about Moses. And then everything really gets tough for a while. A lot of genealogies, a lot of rules, a lot of laws. Then we get to the book of Deuteronomy, which is one long sermon of Moses. And then we get into Joshua and Judges, and then we come to Ruth. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, that's not where Ruth is. Ruth is later on in the Bible. It goes right from Ruth to the stories of the kings in Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. But in the Christian Bible, and this is because a translation was made of the Old Testament just before Jesus came, maybe a couple hundred years or so before Jesus came. I don't remember the exact date. Sorry, you history buffs. But there was a translation from the Hebrew into Greek called the Septuagint. It's called that because legend has it that 70 or 72 scholars translated it in 70 days. It's probably unlikely, but that's what they call it anyway. That was the Bible of the time. People spoke Greek, so the Bible that they read very often when they gathered would be this Greek Bible, and they changed the order for a reason that I don't understand. But they took Ruth and they put it right here. And they put Ruth here for a very good reason. At the end of the period of Judges, we have the last verse of Judges tells you everything you need to know about that period. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Each person did what they thought to be right. And they didn't make very good choices. A lot of war, a lot of fighting, a lot of bad stuff going on. So then at the end of that book, we have the story of Ruth, which actually takes place during the time of these judges. These judges are people, Joshua is the first one, Gideon is one, Deborah is one, but there's also some bad judges in there, or pardon the expression, some really stupid ones like Samson, who might be the dumbest person in all of recorded history. Every single time that woman says, oh, come on, you lied to me last time, I swear this time I won't betray you. And then she betrays him. Just doesn't have a lot on the ball. So in the middle of all of that, happens the story of Ruth. We heard the beginning. Now, what we basically have coming back to this land of Israel is two widows. Almost was three, but Orpah turns back. So it's just Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth. Neither one has a husband. Neither one has children who are male. They're pretty much the poorest of the poor. And I want to tell you a little bit about what happens from there. I'm going to tell you the whole story of Ruth, but I still recommend, if you have time this week or even today, it's only 4 chapters. Sit down, read it in one sitting. It's a beautiful story. It's missing something, though. I have been informed by people in the know that if you want to tell a great story in either a novel or a movie or a TV show or something like that, there are certain elements that have to be present or else it won't engage the reader or the listener or the hearer or whatever. One of those is an antagonist. Ruth doesn't have an antagonist. Read the book. There's not an antagonist. If there's any antagonism, it's economic and climate-based strife. Now remember, these people, this man and this woman, with their 2 sons, they left Israel and went to Moab, their enemy, the land of their enemy, to live because there was no food in Israel. It was either go to the enemy's nation or starve. And then when Naomi and Ruth return, after Naomi's husband and Naomi's 2 sons have died, when they return, they're basically economic refugees again. There's nothing for them in Moab, so they come back to Israel. So here's what happens. Ruth, I have an idea that Ruth's a bit of a looker. Okay? The Bible doesn't tell us this, but I'm going there. All right? She ends up being the one who can take care of Naomi. Naomi, I'm assuming, is just too old to go out and glean in the fields. Because what happens is this. There's a law, a rule in the book of the law that says if you have a field, you cannot harvest the very outside of it. It's not allowed. It's written into the law. You will leave that alone. You will not harvest that. You will let the poor pick off whatever they need. So right there in the book of the law is made provision for the poor. So Naomi sends Ruth out, or Ruth goes out to basically pick up some leavings. This was evidently a pretty dangerous thing for a woman to do. Okay? Woman by herself among the rest of the poor. She's the poorest of the poor too. But she ends up the very first day. Now, if I was writing this for a Hollywood motion picture, the very first day she'd end up in some field where she was abused or beaten or something bad happened to her. But that's not the way the story goes. The very first day, she ends up making a great choice. She goes to Boaz's field. Boaz notices Ruth. He knows that Ruth has done this amazing kindness to Naomi by coming back. He has just been very kind. She's done a grace, if you will, an undeserved favor. She could have stayed in Moab and she would have found a husband. But she came with Naomi. And he really appreciated that. So Ruth, Boaz says to Ruth, Ruth, I want you to stay in my field. You gather in my field. Don't go to other fields. I don't want anything bad to happen to you. He goes to the people that work for him and he basically says, look, you let her pick up anything she wants to. In fact, I want you to pick off some extra stuff and leave it there so she can just pick it up. And she comes back the first day with this huge haul of grain. And Naomi's like, where'd you go? Where'd you get all this? She says, well, I went to this field of this man Boaz. So Boaz happens to be a close relative of Naomi or Naomi's husband. I'm not sure which. And it's a little difficult to understand, but he's what they call a kinsman redeemer. What this means is he is the one that can make things right for Naomi and her daughter. Again, it's hard for us to understand, but in the ancient world, basically, Ruth's next place to go would have been to another relative, and the closer the better. Because she's an in-law, so we're okay with this, all right? So what happens here is Naomi does a little scheming. You stay in that field and you keep going back there. Because this is the guy that can make things right for us. Now, it sounds like they're taking advantage of Boaz. I don't think they are. Okay, I'm just telling you. I just don't think there's any negative turns or any shady characters in this story at all. So our little Bible heroes with a little question mark, this is the one week where you can actually cross out that question mark if you want to. We got some heroes here. Mostly women, by the way, but we got some heroes here. So Boaz is the owner of this field. He's a relative. Naomi and Ruth, I think, scheme a little bit together in a way that's a little difficult to understand and is not going to work its way into my sermon. But a long story short, you expect, it's the ancient world, that Boaz is going to ask Ruth to marry him. One of the reasons that I think this story is not just a story but actually happened is because that's not what happens. Ruth asks Boaz to marry her. That's backwards, right? I think Boaz, I get the impression from the text, Boaz is a little bit older, unmarried. He may not have a lot going on for him, okay? I don't know. All I know is for some reason he's not married, and I think he's delighted that Ruth is interested. Plus, I think he is just so touched by Ruth's kindness. He now has an understanding of the kind of person this is, and it's like, yeah, this is the kind of person I would like to make a life with. So he says, that's great. Let's do that. Let's keep that quiet, though, because there's a closer relative. There's another kinsman redeemer. There's a closer relative, and quite frankly, he gets you first if he wants you. Are you following the story so far? It's better to read, but I don't know. I think I'm doing okay. So what happens is Boaz does not let the grass grow under his feet. He immediately goes and finds this guy. He meets him at the place where you're supposed to discuss these things. And he explains, he says, I want to tell you, a detail appears out of nowhere. I don't know where this comes from. But he basically says, look, Naomi, who came back from Moab, the widow, has a piece of property. Someone needs to redeem it. Someone needs to purchase it, to make it worth something. And you're the guy. You're the closest relative. And the guy's like, this sounds great. I wanted that piece of property. I pass it every day on the way to Starbucks. And he says, okay, there's only one catch. You got to marry Ruth. She comes with it. Bible doesn't explain to us why that's the reason. But anyway, the guy says, I can't do that. That would dilute my inheritance for my kids. I don't know what he means by that. I guess maybe he didn't have a whole lot, and he's thinking, if I have more kids by this woman, then my inheritance is going to be so diluted that no one's going to be able to make a livelihood from it. Or more likely to me, it's like, you know what? I'm already married, and I'm really happily married, and I've heard the stories of the patriarchs with their multiple wives, and it didn't work out so well, so I'm just going to stick with one. I'm really, really interpreting the text there, folks. All right, but it just seems like it's in the character of the story, so I'm going with it. For one reason or another, this guy says, I can't do it, and they shake on it, and he says, Boaz, she's all yours. And then the story takes a turn that I don't think any other story in the Bible does. You could literally put in there, and they lived happily ever after, because that's what happened. Now, if you're waiting for drama, you're not going to get it. That's it. They lived happily ever after. It is a gorgeous, beautiful love story, and it is a story of kindness. Kindness that Naomi does. Naomi and Ruth sort of kind to each other. Kindness that Boaz extends to Ruth. And I would say when Ruth asks Boaz to marry her, another kindness. And then Boaz, doing everything on the level, totally above board, another kindness. I wonder what happens when you do a kindness like that in the ancient world. Well, I learned just by looking at my Bible, you get your name written into the Bible. Whoa. I bet not a lot of people did that. I honestly think, I wonder, yes, you had this rule that you couldn't harvest at the edges of your field. How many people did it anyway? Not Boaz. Boaz is the kind of guy who is a straight shooter. He's a straight shooter. He does things the way he's supposed to all throughout this story. And what happens? Well, I want to tell you that what happens is remarkable, and it's the reason that I think Ruth gets moved where it does in the Bible. And in order for me to illustrate just what is happening here, I'm going to go to the New Testament. I'm not only going to go to the New Testament, but I'm going to go to the absolute most boring part of the entire New Testament. Are you ready? If you wanted to fall asleep during my sermon, this is the moment. The very, very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. A record of the ancestors of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. And now we're just going to go lists. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. I know, it's inspiring, isn't it? Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, you guessed it, was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Aram. Aram was the father of Amminadab. That's one of my favorite names. Why don't we name our children Amminadab anymore? Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Are you holding on to something? Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. So Boaz comes from a harlot. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. There are 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. Each one of them is there for a reason. Each one of them, except for Mary, the final one, is an outsider, doesn't belong in Israel. And yet, through their wise choices, or their kindnesses in the case of Ruth, not only did Ruth get written into the Bible, because Ruth's son Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David the king. She gets to be the grandmother of David the king. She gets to be the ancestor of our Savior. That is what kindness and faithfulness does. That's amazing to me. And next time you read the genealogy of Matthew, you'll remember that, I hope, that such a kindness happened. I think sometimes we forget about kindness because we live in a world where getting ahead is what's celebrated. That's what happens. And yet, our opportunity to do kindness for someone else can have long-lasting effects. Ruth's kindness, Boaz's kindness, Naomi's kindness, these people being kind led to us being saved from our sins. Whoa! That's pretty significant. We're not always going to see the results of whatever that kindness is. And sometimes I think people think that that when folks say what I'm about to say, they're watering down the gospel. But the fact of the matter is, maybe half of being a Christian is just being nice. In fact, maybe it's a lot more than half. Maybe more than half of what we're about as people following Jesus and carrying the name of the living God into the world is just not being a jerk, but being nice. There are ways that you can do this. There are ways that you can do this in your daily life. It's just easy. When you encounter somebody at work, a client, a customer, a boss, if they're being a jerk, you just remember the proverb that says, a kind word turns away wrath. I'm not going to let this person change my day. I'm going to change their day and just respond in kind. Had a little tiff with somebody that's a fellow part of the company I work for who I never see face to face, but I encounter either on the phone or in text just a little while ago. And at the end of it all, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. But I sent him a text. I said, hey, I was kind of a jerk today, and you didn't deserve that. I'm sorry. I never heard back from him, but I'd like to think that his next day was better. One of my favorite things to do, just to be kind, is something that you can do today when you go out to lunch. 2 things. Number 1, tip big. Christians after church, we're known for not tipping. That's sad. That saddens me. If you ask a friend who's a waiter or waitress in a restaurant, they will tell you that Sunday afternoon is the worst part of their week. People come in from church, after church, and for some reason, we don't tip well. I'm telling you what, I heard that story from someone who was a waitress, and I said, I'm never doing that again. Okay, I tip okay when I go out to a restaurant, but when it's Sunday morning, because I go to breakfast sometimes before I come here, and every now and then I go someplace where I can sit down, I leave a bigger tip. Here's another fun thing that you can do, okay? Same thing, restaurant, okay? You ever get really good service at a restaurant? Ask to see the manager. Anybody do that? I do that all the time. It bugs my son when he's with me so much. But I'll say, excuse me, I'll go to like when you walk up to the counter and pay at wherever restaurant, or I'd like to talk to the manager. If they're really busy, I don't want to bother the manager. And I say, I just want you to know, I have a few things that I say, and I really mean them. I said, this waitress that just helped me, if she's not training all the other waitresses, she should be. And find a way to do that. I've done that I can't tell you how many times I've done that at Kroger. When I encounter somebody at Kroger who's really, really helpful and nice, I want to make their day. I'm shopping in the produce department one day in my local Kroger up in Mainville, and it looked beautiful. And it doesn't normally look beautiful. And I just turned to the person who was stocking, and I said, I just want to let you know that the last couple times I've been in here, this place is amazing. The produce looks fresh. It's full. It looks great. It's easy to get in and out. Whatever you have done differently, it is great. Turns out the person I'm talking to is the brand new manager who has just changed the way they were doing things, and now she feels like it's for something. Can we do that at home? Next time that maybe we get into a little tiff, maybe we can just deflect that. Find something great to say about that kid before they go off to school, or some wonderful thing about your spouse. Just find it. Find it somewhere. Some people have what they think is a gift for this. Kindness. It's not a gift. It's actually a fruit of the Spirit if you actually read the Bible. Kindness is actually a fruit of the Spirit. So you people that I'm talking to have the Holy Spirit living in you. So guess what? You have the capacity for the kind of kindness that is a spiritual thing, not just being nice to people. Now I have an assignment for you. I gave you a few examples, and I want you to come up with your own. Your bulletin had a little card in it. I want you to try to find a way to do a kindness every day this week. Check it off. And by the way, if you're married, you can use 2 or even 3 of those for your spouse. Okay, they don't have to be somebody different every day. They should be, but if you're married, if it's your spouse, that's okay. Put it in your wallet, put it wherever. And here's why. Because the kind of kindness that we're talking about leads to redemption. And I don't know if we understand what redemption means. We get a great picture of redemption here in the story of Ruth. But here's a way to understand it. Have you ever redeemed a coupon at the store? You've got a piece of paper that says it's $2 off dog biscuits. And if you're not going to use it, please give it to me because I have big dogs and they eat a lot of biscuits. $2 off milk bones. It is worthless. In fact, sometimes it says on there in the fine print, the actual cash value of this little piece of paper is like 1/100th of a cent or something ridiculous like that. It's worthless until you make it into something valuable, until you redeem it. And that is what happens when this kinsman redeemer marries this ultra poor widow. He makes her, and Naomi by extension, worth something again. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing that we can actually, by our kindness, maybe make somebody's day that's worthless worth something again? And that is okay. That is the way to live. So I challenge you, try that this week. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you for the example that we get from these amazing women of faith that get their names in the Bible and get to be a part of the story of redemption. We ask that you will turn us and mold us and shape us into people who speak words of kindness, redeeming the world around us, bringing value to the world around us. Just as Jesus redeemed us and brought value to our lives. Help us to understand the amazing opportunity that we have one day after another to do such things. So God, we offer ourselves to you. And we ask you to watch over us, bless us, and inspire us in this way as we take ourselves and therefore you into this week. In Jesus' precious and holy name. And everybody agreed and said, Amen. Amen.